There are a lot of great stories in the Bible, but one of the best stories of all is the story of Esther that we heard this morning in our Old Testament reading. We only got a little snippet of the whole story, and so you really need to hear the whole story to get the picture. Once upon a time, long, long ago, the Jewish people lived under the reign of the Persian Empire, about, say, 500 years before Christ. And there was a king of Persia named Ahasuerus. And Ahasuerus decided to give a great banquet for all his officers and courtiers. So he called them all together, and they had this great feast. And in the course of the dinner, they were eating all the fine food and enjoying the entertainment and the lavish drinking. And King Ahasuerus ordered that the queen, whose name was Vashti, should come before the banquet and show the men her beauty. So he gave the order and gave the message to Queen Vashti that she should come. Queen Vashti was very beautiful. And when she heard the order, she refused to come. She said, I'm not going to go out and be displayed in front of your drunken friends like a piece of meat. And she didn't come. Well, King Ahasuerus was angry. He said, in that case, I will find another queen. So he ordered that all the beautiful young maidens in the kingdom be brought to the palace, and he would choose one of the beautiful maidens to be the new queen in place of Queen Vashti. And so it was. And one of the beautiful young maidens that was chosen was Esther. Esther earned the king's favor, and he chose her to become the new queen in place of Vashti. But what the king didn't know is that Esther was Jewish. Apparently he never actually sat down and had a conversation with her to find out anything about her, so he didn't know. All he cared about was that she was beautiful and regal. Now Esther had been orphaned at a young age, and she had been brought up by her uncle Mordecai. And her uncle Mordecai raised her to be a good and faithful Jew. And when Esther was elevated to be the king, Mordecai would come to the gates of the palace every afternoon and would communicate with Esther through a messenger who would go back and forth. So he kept up with her. Now in this kingdom there was an evil man named Haman, who was a counselor to the king. And Haman hated Mordecai. He hated Mordecai because Mordecai paid no attention to how important Haman was. Haman was pompous and conceited and jealous and vengeful, and he couldn't stand it that Mordecai ignored him. He tried to get rid of Mordecai, and when that didn't work, he decided that he was going to wipe out the entire Jewish population. So he went to the king and he said, Your Highness, it has come to my attention that there are people living in your kingdom who do not pay attention to you. They do not give you, the king of all Persia, the proper and honor that are due to you. They follow their own laws, and they turn their backs on you, their true and rightful king. They are traitors to the nation and to you. And King Ahasuerus was angry. He said, how can this be? What should be done? And Haman pulled out a piece of paper he happened to have with him, and he says, I've taken the liberty to write up an edict to be announced to the whole nation to eradicate the Jewish people on a day 11 months from now. It's ready for your signature right now. And so, with no more ado, the king signed the edict, and his anger abated. Well, when Mordecai heard about the contents of the edict, he was frightened. What will happen to our people, he thought. So he sent a message to Queen Vashti that they needed to meet in person right away. So she arranged a meeting, and Mordecai explained the danger to her. Our people are to be annihilated. You must intervene and convince the king to cancel and withdraw the edict. But Esther said there's one problem. If anyone comes before the king without being specifically asked by the king, they'll be put to death. And that includes me. If I appear before the king and he holds out his golden scepter, that means I have got his favor, and then I can live. But I don't know which it will be. I take my life into my hands if I come to the palace. Mordecai said, you must do it. The lives of all our people depend on it. She said, I'm not sure I'm able to do this. It's too frightening. And Mordecai said, this is the most important decision of your life. Who knows? Maybe you were born for just such a time as this. And she thought about it, and she says, I've decided I will do it, and if I perish, I perish. Just give me 3 days to fast and pray. So after 3 days, she dressed up in her most beautiful gown, and she came to the king's chamber in the palace. And when he saw her, he reached out his golden scepter to her. And he said, come in. What is your request, King Esther? I will give it to you, even to the half of your kingdom. And she didn't make her request immediately. She just asked that she could have a banquet with the king and Haman and herself. And so the king gave the order. And when Haman heard it, he went home to his friends and he bragged about how important he was and how he'd been elevated to such a great thing with the king. So they had the banquet with just the three of them. And again, the king asked, Queen Esther, what is your request? And she says, just grant me one more banquet with the three of us, you and me and Haman. And the king agreed. Again, Haman went home and bragged to his family and friends how honored he had been to be in the presence of the king and the queen. But when they had the second banquet with the king and Haman and Esther, the king again asked her what her request was. And she says, O king, my own people, the Jewish people, have been marked for death and annihilation by your enemy. And the king was outraged. He says, who is this enemy of mine? And Esther stood up and pointed to Haman and says, it is he, this evil Haman, who has planned to do this. And the king in his anger condemned Haman to death on the gallows by hanging. And then Mordecai was elevated and put in Haman's place, and he became the king's counselor and managed to have the force of the edict negated. So the lives of all the Jewish people were saved. Esther was a strong and a courageous woman, and she did what she needed to do at the moment. She saved the Jewish people from genocide. And to this day, the Jewish people remember this in the holiday of Purim, which usually is held in March. So this is a very important historical event, or mythical event at least, in the lives of the Jewish people. Now I think the key sentence in this whole story is what Mordecai said to Esther. Who knows? You may have been born for just such a time as this. In other words, it all depends on you. You are the one who has the power to make a decision. It's up to you. Well, I would not want to be in Queen Esther's position. That's a lot of pressure. But it is a question that maybe we should all ask ourselves. Is it possible that we have been born for just such a time as this? Time that we're in today. You know, for the last month we've been observing the season of creation, and we've been thinking about the environmental crisis and the danger the earth is in. And I know it's all too easy to shrug our shoulders and say, you know, I'm just one person, what can I do? It's too big of a crisis for me. But it may be that we were born for just such a time as this. It may be that we are the ones who will turn the tide of history and save the planet from destruction. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? As the great anthropologist Margaret Mead once said, do not doubt that a small, committed group of people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Who knows? We may have been born for just such a time as this.